Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the RC West Oversight Committee Q3 meeting. My name is Elena Koppel-Alford, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs here at California ISO, and I'll be facilitating the meeting today. Before I hand it over to Chris Hoffman, I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping items and the agenda. So a reminder that the call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes. Please request permission from RC West before reprinting any related transcriptions. And all the materials related to the Oversight Committee are available on KISO.com under the Stay Informed tab under RC West. To raise your hand, if you connected through your computer or use the Call Me option, you can select the raised hand icon at the bottom of your screen. If you dialed into the meeting, you can press #2 to get into the question queue. And please remember to state your name and affiliation before making your comment. If you need any technical assistance, you can send the chat to the event producer. Today's event producer is Michelle. And you can send your question to either me, Elena Koppel-Alford, or all panelists. And for the agenda today, I'm going to hand it over to Chris Hoffman and Chris Stanford for Oversight Committee business. And then we'll go over the RC West operations update with John Phipps doing the welcome, Tim Beach doing the general operations updates, Kathy Fernandez with procedures update, Kendall Para and Ong U with RC metrics update. And then we will go on to working group updates with Raja for the solar eclipse planning and the FERC 881 update. Tricia Johnson will cover the cold weather NERC Alert 3 discussion, and then back to Raja for the SOL methodology changes for 2024. And then we'll go over the next meeting and then open it for public comment. So I'm going to hand it over to Chris Hoffman.
Hey, thanks, Elena. Welcome everyone to the third quarter Oversight Committee meeting. Chris Hoffman with Salt River Project and joined by Christopher Stanford with BPA. It's that time of year again where we need to take a look at the annual charter review. So we're going to put that out for any comments or changes you'd like to make on there. It'll be on the RC portal under the Oversight Committee. And then we'll be checking again a couple weeks prior to our fourth quarter meeting. And any updates or changes that are in there, we'll go ahead and review on our fourth quarter meeting and then make those changes or vote that in. Tricia, anything else I'm missing on that?
No, you have it covered.
All right, perfect. Anybody have any questions before we dive right into this? Perfect. I think next up we've got the RC West operations update, and I'll hand it over to John.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to give a warm welcome and thank you for participating in the RC West Oversight Committee meetings. We've made it so far through the summer, and we just appreciate the feedback and comments we receive to help us continuously improve RC West operations. Tim Beach has done a great job, I think, of working with your teams, preparing for the summer, incorporating ideas, but also sharing about contingency reserve management and the use of the EEA watch. And it's been exciting to see more and more entities using that to help prepare for some of the tighter days. But just thank you again, welcome, and I'll turn it back to Chris.
You're on mute still. Thanks, John, appreciate it. I think we'll move over to general operations with Tim Beach.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, a few things. Do we have the presentation up? I can't see it right now. Can everybody else see it?
Yeah, it's up.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing it on the thing. There we go. Now I can see it. I don't know if there's a delay there or not. All right, great. Thank you. So a few things. last week, and of course, it was very hot, and then we had the hurricane, or tropical depression by the time it got to California and Sonoma area. So we sort of went from the fry pan into the bathtub, as I like to say. But yesterday, last week, we did set our year-to-date peaks for load across the WEC footprint and RC West. So 164.2 gigs for WEC. Of course, you can see the historical record there. And then also 126.3 gigawatts for RC West. Went through very well. We had a few EEAs, or I think one EEA won during the event, and was there an EEA watch, I believe, as well. But really pretty remarkable that we got through that event without a lot of EEAs for the heat event. The hurricane, we did experience loss of one 500 kV line and some lines in the IID area. Those have been returned with the exception of one. From my records, so we have one out. This is Pilot Knob to El Centro. So there's the issue at Pilot. So they're working on that. I don't have a return time on that, but otherwise, the hurricane, which was expected to be a water event by the time it got to California, thankfully, we didn't really see a lot of damage materialize from that. But for those of us that have lived through floods at different times of our careers, one of the things we've always experienced, or I've experienced anyhow, is the flooding of substations, loss of RTUs, loss of generation stations due to flooding at the stations. So thankfully, we lost just the one unit at El Centro. So pretty strong performance to the hurricane. But it's another list of things that now we have to, probably weren't too worried about a hurricane in the past, but now that it's evident that it is something that could, strike us and cause a significant operating event in the future. So we'll have to watch out for that. If we go on to the next slide, please. I just went through just some of the logs and statistics over the last, since we met last, just sort of try to give you a feel for what the RCs are working on during the day in and day out period between times. So over the last, there is one error on here, the EA2, that should be a 0. But RC West, so we had the number of EAs this year, we're up to 23 for the year. So, and over the last 3-month period, we've had 18 of those. A lot of those are related to, one is requiring emergency assistance and having to be in an EA to get that. An EA watch generally satisfies that. The other instances in the EA3s especially are the areas where reserves are dispatched and then firm load that can be shed within 10 minutes is designated as contingency reserve replacement. In other words, they reestablish the contingency reserves by using that firm load to shed upon an event. So that's working pretty well. Thankfully, without that, without that ability, there may have been potential for additional load shedding over the last year. So I think that's a strong improvement to our operating paradigm and the contingency reserve paradigm in general. One of the things we've talked about in project, we'll talk a little bit more about it in coming up here, is our frequency response monitoring. That's one of the things we're doing in place of just being able to bank on spinning reserve, sitting there ready to push the system through a fault. So the emergency response is key to that. So we're monitoring that, and we'll have some reports on that. In other areas, we've had 3 insecure operating states. So the reminder on insecure operating state, this is a very high urgent event that takes place for the RCs. It is essentially an eye roll that shows up in real time, where there could be the presence of either thermal cascade or voltage collapse. And they run through some tests, they do some studies to really validate the presence of a thermal cascade or voltage collapse, and then they mitigate it. But they have 30 minutes to do that. So it's a very, very sort of I would call it a stressful situation for the RCs to get through that. So we've had 3 of those. We typically have those occur. Sometimes they're validated, sometimes it's just a data error or another error of another nature that, would invalidate the insecure operating state. Those aren't reported here. Those are the 3 that really happened. Eye rolls. So we have, we're very proactive on our eye roll management. we use margins to protect from going over the limit. We had one IRO Oregon export we got within the margin. Now the margin is very large. It's 500 megawatts from the limit. So we started actually looking at it at I think 750 and then 500, and then we start to mitigate. So we have warning of that. So that we had one occurrence of that, which is a pretty good. Typically we have a few more occurrences where we creep up to that margin limit and mitigate. We haven't had any exceedances there, so that's a plus. Course outage wise, so 345 department equipment here. I did not quantify the 115, 230 kV, 161, 92 kV that we also monitor. There's quite a few of those. But we had 92 events, forced outages in those equipment. And I'm counting lines, transformers, and generators. So anytime we lose a piece of equipment like that, the RCs go through and do an analysis of what that equipment loss means. It could mean a study reflecting what there's our next worst contingency, trying to identify that and what mitigation needs to take place to minimize that. It will, many times, especially if you get in the 500 kV system, Northern California and Oregon, it necessitates a review of the Oregon export limit and the COI and Milwaukee transfer limits, as well as the Washington import IRO limits. So that's another event that, they really work pretty quickly on to determine what those limits may be and there's a change, and then implement any mitigation against that. Frequency excursions, we've had 16 frequency excursions. Again, this is not a thing that we've become concerned about. We see the frequency get low, especially if we can't identify the cause. We really want to find the cause of why the frequency went low. And if we can't find things, we become concerned that we lost visibility of a generator or something like that in the system that tripped offline, but we don't have an indication of it. Typically, we almost always find these, and lately it's been ACE diversions, or the interconnection in general is behind in its dispatch on a load curve, and they're catching up. Sometimes it's the loss of a line or the loss of a generator that'll trigger it. So we'll always investigate those. Mitigation events, we have 87. Now, this is not all the mitigation events we work on. This is the 87 are the ones that required log entries and were significant enough to require quite a bit of RC involvement. It doesn't count the in our RTC. We also logged the very simple mitigation where you have something show up. It shows 101 or 102%. The RC will contact the TOP, ask them what's going on. A lot of times they say a unit's coming up, should be clear in a second. So we don't generate a big log on that in our slick logging tool, but it is recorded within the logging tool in our TCA. We have 4 oscillation events. So this is something that is ongoing and is prevalent in the ISO area. Contingency reserve events, not ISO area, excuse me, the WEC area. So we fortunately have some very good partners at BPA and BC Hydro. They're very good at monitoring oscillations. So typically very quickly able to, and at CAISO, we're very able to identify these oscillations. Lately, there's been some IBRs or batteries that have been causing some AGC controls. So they don't reach the classic definition of an oscillation all the time, but we do see it in the frequency, and it's a low-level thing. So that's something that's been going on. Contingency reserves, we had 19 contingency reserves events. So 19 times we had VAs that fell below their contingency reserve obligations. Those are typically corrected very quickly, but this is another high sense of urgency for the RC to deal with those. 35 wildfires that required or necessitated a log, required investigation by the RC, whether it's threatening a line, where it's at, analyze the threats of the line, talk to the TOP, that type of thing. So we have seen those starting to pick up here towards the later part of summer. We had a slow start to it earlier in the season, though. And then we had one islanding event, and this is when Alberta islanded away from the Western interconnection. So typically, BCRC supervises that return or connection of Alberta through their system. And we have one connection at RC West that goes to the Matto line connection in Montana. So, but nevertheless, it is a big event on the system. It does usually cause a frequency excursion. And we're also always very concerned that they get connected back in the right method. And BC Hydro is very good at that, or BCRC. Any questions on all that? So it's quite a bit of work there. I was a little surprised in some of it when I brought it up, but and I think I'll try to look at this going forward a little bit more, so we can try to find some trends maybe, or just see what our workload is like. Next slide then, please. These are EAs for the year, so you can see at 2023 we're at 23 now, just about half of what we were in 2020 when we had the heat wave. As we were talking about earlier, fall is 30 days away, September 21st. The fall equinox will be here, but we still got 30 days of summer left. And last year, 2022, we had the strongest heat wave was early September. So we'll see what happens with the weather. I know we have warm weather coming again next week in California, but I think we're positioned pretty well on that going forward. Any questions on operations update? Okay.
No, currently no questions on the line.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate the updates. I think we've got Kathleen up with our procedures update next. Kathleen?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. This is Kathy Fernandez with your procedures update. Can we go ahead and move to the next slide, please? Okay, so on the first screen here, on the first slide, I should say, we've got the recently published procedures. We published RC 0520, loss of monitoring and analysis tools. We updated to clarify RC actions to be initiated for SE or RTCA failures lasting for 2 or more consecutive runs. We updated RC 9570, the SANASE EEAs and requests for emergency assistance. We updated RC 9550, adding the Yuma transformer overload for the loss of Imperial Valley to North Gila, and a few other updates noted there. Then we published back on 7/27 our temporary operating guide, RC 9520, clarified applicability of temporary guide in section 1, changed the WEIM constraint to WinStar TCOR in step 2, and then we updated the figure, clarified the PAC schedule curtailment in step 3, and then a few other minor changes. We updated RC 9000, the open loop guideline procedure. We updated RC 210, which was a minor update, just updating our EOP 11 references and minor formatting on that one. RC 9110, we updated the Appendix D2 revised unplanned outage table with the correct equipment, and then we updated Table 2 limit to align with limits in Appendix D. We updated RC 530. We updated the contact information for the NERC IT support desk for RCIS failures. Those were just some of the procedures over the last 2 months that we updated. Are there any questions on any of these? I saw a question come in the chat. I'm not sure if that was related to one of the procedures or if that was something else. Okay, I guess.
There are no questions on the line, Kathy.
Perfect. Okay, Michelle, thank you. Can we advance to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is recently published procedures continuing on. We have quite a few that published on June 1st, a lot of annual reviews here. Our C-140 guidelines for sending messages across RC scenes. Yeah, those were just minor edits. And then the others are all annual review with minor edits, annual and a periodic review. Let's see, I believe that is it as far as the recently published. Any questions on any of these?
Kathy, I'm not sure if this is related to the procedures or something prior. Steven Ashbaker from WEC says, what is the threshold for a frequency excursion?
I thought that I had seen that come in. Can we go back to the previous slide? Let me see if that was one of the procedures that was listed here. I'm not sure.
This is John Phipps. I think
yeah.
Tim Beach can probably check on that and get Steve that information.
Okay, great. Thanks, John.
Yeah, Tim, here I can get the specific. Generally related to an FTL, Steve.
Okay, I think we can go ahead and advance to the next. And then I think that's all I've got for recently published. If we can go ahead and go on to the next one. These are just a few upcoming changes, very minimal right now. I've got one that I'm going to be publishing today. This is RC 110, Communications Protocols, just for annual review, along with the other two that are going to be coming up at the end of the month, are RC 470 and 470B. Very minor edits. Actually, those won't get published now until 9/5. We have a target date that was pushed out to 9/5, and I didn't have time to update the slide, so that was just on the last two. That's all I've got. Are there any questions regarding any of the procedure updates, either that have published or upcoming?
There are currently no questions in the queue.
Okay, great. Thank you. That is all I've got.
Thanks, Kathleen. Appreciate the update.
Thank you. Thank you.
Got Kendall and Ong up next to go over the RC metrics for Q2.
Thanks. So I'm Kendall Parra with the NetApps group here at CAISO. I'll be giving a brief overview of the RC metrics with State Estimator and RTCA. So the residual errors that we're continuing to look at are for the line megawatt flows. And looking at the chart here, they've stayed relatively within the same region. We've seen a little bit of a trend downward in Q2, a couple spikes, but overall it looks like it's hopefully trending in the downward direction. Next slide, please. And here's a chart showing the number of non-converged contingencies within the last few months. So we had that spike that we saw back in Q1, and now recently it looks like we're trending a little bit upward, but overall we're back to the lower region of non-converged. We have a couple enhancements coming into RTCA that are going to help us kind of debug some of those non-converged better and work on getting that number even lower. Next slide, please. And for this one, I'll turn it over to Ong. Thanks.
Thank you, Kendall. Hi, everyone. This is Ong. For the DACA accuracy metrics, as you can see, we are a little bit trending upward compared to March. However, we are maintaining, same around average threshold around the 40%. We'll be monitoring it to see if it is going upward trend or, getting back down in the next quarter. Can you go to the next slide, please? For the CD tickets submission and the resolution, you can see the amount of CD tickets being submitted and the amount of being closed out. We've been trying to catch up and close out all these CD tickets as soon as we could. So the trend is going downward, and then we will keep track on it, and then making sure that trend's going down for the next quarter as well. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, that one, I think it will go back to Tim.
Thanks, Kendall. Appreciate it. Tim, are you up, or are we moving to Raj?
Raj.
Raj, you want to give us some updates from the working groups?
Yeah, good afternoon, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. Can we go to the next slide, Michelle? Yeah, I think before we go into the working group updates, we added this agenda at the last minute, so we did not get a chance to add slides onto that. But again, this is more of a general awareness point of view from an RC West point of view. There's everybody, at least everybody is aware that there's a solar eclipse coming in to Western United States. I think October 14th. It's a Saturday, around 8 o'clock in the morning to 10 a.m. roughly, 2.5 hours, right? We had the last solar eclipse back in 2017, right? And again, we had some events, generation lost, whatnot, but we didn't have that much solar at that time. So now there's a lot of solar for most of the Western entities. There's a lot of solar, both behind the meter as well as, right, utility connected solar. So there's going to be more impacts for everybody. There's going to be generation loss and obviously ramp down and ramp ups, right? So from an RC West point of view, we just want to make sure to coordinate with you folks and make sure that we are on the same page with if there's any particular things that any of you would like us to perform studies, whatnot, we want to do that. Obviously, from a awareness point of view, as part of the D+1, D+2 studies, right, we want to make sure that we get the right forecast from you folks, right? I mean, it does not mean that we don't get a good forecast today, but just be generally aware that, right, those hourly forecasts, make sure that the expected solar impacts are included in that forecast during those hours, so we can actually perform those studies. And if you see any issues, we'll definitely coordinate with you folks and try to develop a plan surrounding that, right? Now, that's part of normal process, but we'll definitely keep extra visual on these days in the D+1 and D+2 studies. Apart from that, right, if there's any outages, whatnot, making sure that we plan on those, right? If there's any existing outages during this time frame, potentially are we going to see any issues from a reliability point of view on overloads, whatnot? So let's plan on that. Let's plan on those. And what else? Tim, if you think about anything else, let me know, because I was not here in 2017. I'm not sure what peak did, so we can just coordinate on that as well. Tim, do you want to add anything else apart from what I said?
Show concerns in or react our system to, or their system to manage the eclipse or loss of solar generation. So, that's one thing we'll be interested in. That I don't think we have.
Yeah, maybe I have one more idea is like, Chris, maybe we can have a tabletop exercise and try to see what each TOP is preparing for, right? Maybe that could be a good exercise before we get to the October 14th.
All right, that'd be great, Raj. Hey, just a quick reminder, if you're not speaking, we're picking up a lot of background noise from someone. So just please mute yourself if you're not speaking.
Okay, if there's no questions, I think that's it. So let's work on that, Chris, and yeah, we'll definitely work with coordinate with you folks and try to develop a plan from an RC West point of view. Thank you. Next slide, Michelle. Are there any questions from anybody before I come to the next working group updates?
There are no questions on the line, Raja.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so on the FERC 881 ambient literacy rating and dynamic line rating process, it's more of a update what we have been working on. Next slide, Michelle. So again, this is like these are the slides that we have been using. Just wanted to give an update. We are still under the track 1, right? For people who are not, who I think I'm sure we presented this group a couple of times. CAISO RC West have divided this whole process into 3 different tracks. Where the track 1, we are targeting the real-time application of this AARs. What do I mean by that? Utilizing the ambient literacy rating in our real-time RTCA, real-time EMS process as well as the HANA process. So that's what we're targeting on the track 1. So we have actually shared some data templates, how we're going to receive the data through ICCP in a couple of working group meetings, and we're still on target to complete this by again Q2 2023. So we'll be ready, but doesn't mean it's a requirement for everybody to start submitting the data. So we'll be working with a couple of entities that have this process ready, that actually utilize the AR ratings on some of the equipment. So we'll start working with them and try to get the data and utilize in our processes. But there's no requirement on anybody. Just want to make sure that. Track 2, again, the track 2 process, it's more, as you are aware, there's a look ahead. The major component is a look ahead ratings. There's a requirement for 240 hours of ratings that needs to be acquired and utilized in all the processes. From an RCWS point of view, all the reliability applications like D+1, D+2 studies that we do, or ad hoc D+3, and any of the short-term outage studies. So we need to start utilizing those ratings in those processes. We are not going to utilize those ratings under the track 2. All those processes will be made changes under the track 3, but at least develop a tool where we can interface with the TOPs and start acquiring the data. So that whole process will be accomplished under the track 2. And track 3 is where we make sure that all our tools are compliant with the FERC Order 881. That's the overall process. We've been doing a lot of updates, initiatives, right? We have quarterly initiative updates. We have stakeholder groups we created. There's a data submission working group, as well as the methodology working group. The methodology working group is where we started working with the TOPs to make sure that we are all the TOPs need to make changes to the rating methodologies, need to update the rating methodologies, and need to develop tools. So we're trying to utilize that group as a venue where people can share. If any TOP that has made a lot of progress, they can share their stories, whatnot, their processes, so other TOPs can learn from that and then try to implement their process. So any questions? I don't think we have any. Michelle, can you go to the next slide? Okay. Yeah, so in general, right, at various forums, we did talk about in detail what each of those track 1 has. But if there's any particular questions that anybody has, definitely raise hands and we can resolve those questions. Before I hand off this to Tricia.
Hi, I'm Tricia Johnstone, Director of Operational Readiness. Want to give a brief update on the cold weather task force and our efforts to respond to the NERC alert level 3. Next slide, please, Michelle. So just to give you an idea of the timeline, so we actually, to prepare for the standards changes that became effective April of this year, we updated the IRO 10 data request and specification effective April of 2023. And we gave a deadline for submission of the cold weather temperature data for resources for RC West area by July 1st of 2023. And while all that was in flight, NERC had issued a level 1 alert in February and a level 3 alert in May. And while we were kind of evaluating how that could impact the data specification that was already in effect, we've also been keeping an eye on the standards drafting work that's still in progress, where there could be upcoming changes here for EOP 11, TOP 2, and EOP 12, none of which have been approved yet. So next slide, please. We reconvened the task force, and we talked about this at the last Oversight Committee meeting. So we met in June and discussed the level 3 alert, decided we were going to send out a survey so we could talk about and collect feedback on, okay, this is the data we've already started collecting. And we started actually seeing some submissions coming in as entities were starting to respond to NERC's level 3 alert. And so we were seeing kind of some crossed wires. The survey results were helpful. Everyone really just wants to kind of stay focused on the standards which are in effect right now, and then potentially just add on a minimal amount of information, which the NERC alert is asking the generators to provide as additional information to the BAs, TOPs, and RCs. So we had a meeting in August where we kind of reconfirmed that. We're doing a very minor update to the data specification to add the definition for extreme cold weather temperature. And then we've added some additional fields to collect some resource data consistent with the data that's now being requested by the alert. And like I said, and it's an interesting place to be because technically the additional data is not in effect in the standards yet. So we're doing it based on that NERC level 3 alert. Next slide, please. So just to kind of illustrate the difference here. So the data fields in black, and Rachel can correct me if I'm wrong on this, the data fields in black are what we were already collecting based on the standards in effect, and the resource ID and the RDF ID were data fields we were specifically asking for RC West area. That way we could map this information back into the modeled resource information. All of the additional fields are things that we are now collecting based on the NERC alert, the essential actions 7 and 8. Essentially, the generators are being asked to not only provide additional information about the resources, but also about preparation activities, additional protection measures, and if they have been impacted by recent events and whatnot. So we are adding that into basically the resource data template. The draft is posted on the RC portal under the data exchange working group. And then we'll be discussing it at the upcoming data exchange working group meeting to, kind of get our template locked down and finalized before we make it effective. We did discuss effective date with the task force, and as the NERC alert is due, I think by mid-October for everyone, we wanted to allow a little bit of grace time for the RC data submission. So we're looking at probably making our effective date on the IRO 10 specification more like latter part of November, December 1, something like that. So, and I think that's my last slide. Are there any questions on the cold weather task force? Yeah, and we definitely, we don't want to get too far ahead of this on the RC's data request and specification, we want to pace with what the balancing authorities are collecting from the resources in their area. So, we wanted to be careful not to overreach on this.
There are no questions in queue.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Wait, one question did just pop up. Sorry, Tricia, one question did pop up from Paul. Okay, Paul, go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
I don't recall if most BA TOPs are going after those generators that are falling under the NERC definition of bulk electric, or was there a set threshold in terms of NVA output of the generators in terms of this cold weather?
That's a good question, Paul. So we, in our IRO 10 specification, for the resource data that we collect, we do use the NERC definition. So if it's considered to be a BES impacting or a BES resource, per the NERC definition, then those are resources we're expecting to have submitted anyway. So it would be for data for those same resources. And then this is really kind of the catch-up period, and then moving forward, any new resources that get added to the system, this would just be part of the template for a new resource submission as well.
All right. I think those are all the questions I see in the queue. I don't see anything in the chat, so I think we're good.
Thank you. I think next presenter is fine.
So the next slide is key considerations for winter 2023-2024.
Sorry,
Michelle, can you go to the next slide?
Yeah, I forgot I had left that in there. This was one more thing. I had shown this at the last RC Oversight Committee meeting, but just kind of a reminder for folks that even though these standards aren't in effect yet, I know we are, as soon as we get done with summer here, we're going to start pivoting towards adapting our summer heat event plan and our playbook towards winter extreme. So if anybody has any questions about what we've done with our playbook and how we're going to be adapting it, feel free to reach out. We can share more maybe at the Q4 meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Tricia. I think we've got Raja up next with the SOL methodology changes.
Yep. Thank you, Chris. Again, I'm sure everybody's aware, right? The FAC 11 and FAC 14, both standards, right, have been changed. There's been a lot of new language added into those, and those standards are effective April 1st, 2024, I believe. So part of that, right, RC West has created a task force with RC West customers to look into that and make sure that our SOL methodology that RC West has is reflective of this new standard changes. So this presentation is about most of the work has been done. Li-Ching Jin from our team has represented that task force and worked with the stakeholders to update the SOL methodology. They had a lot of calls, I think, and then they went different rounds of SOL methodology changes and finally have landed on the final changes. So it can go to the next slide, Michelle. So again, some of the key changes that the standards are documenting. This is more SOL. What is the SOL? What is the SOL exceedance? Right? And obviously they clarified the definition of SOL exceedance, and they clarified a couple of things. What ratings we can use, right? And the duration associated with those ratings can be used for SOL exceedances. So in general, the RC West current SOL methodology document, it reflects what the changes are. There's only a couple of changes that need to be done. Overall, I would say it's not a huge impact from RC West point of view, because we do most of the stuff, most of our SOL methodology, the existing SOL methodology reflects what NERC wants. But it's still, there's some changes, especially around communication. When do you need to communicate, when the TOP and an RC needs to communicate, and what type of SOL, what type of SOL exceedances that the communication needs to be done. So those are the ones that the changes in this new standard. Next slide, please. So this is again, I tried to document what are the major changes. Again, this is not a training at this point, right? Once the SOL methodology is finalized, as we make changes to our processes to receive some of the duration associated with the ratings, right? So definitely we'll plan to have another discussion with the RCWS customers and make sure that we're all on the same page with what the expectations are once this new SL methodology goes live. As I mentioned, right, the main thing is the communications. Another major change that this new standard talk about is the stability limits, right? The stability limits and how you communicate, how the TOP and the RC communicate. So what do I mean by that? I think one big change is if the TOPs have any SOL the stability limits, SOL based upon the stability limits, I say. And the stability limits actually impact the neighboring TOP, then the RCWS needs to be aware of that. RCWS will validate that, right? So we need to establish a process how we're going to do that, right? How we're going to validate those, and obviously we need to work together and then develop those plans, develop the process. And if any of those SOLs, the stability limits based upon SOLs need to be monitored, need to be calculated in real time, we need to make sure that the appropriate tools are updated with those. So those are things that we need to work together. And then as well as the communication is another key things that this new SL methodology is going to talk about. Any questions?
I do not. Oh, wait, there is one question in queue.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Oh, your line is unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah. When are we planning to finish this new methodology? I didn't capture the date.
So this April 1st, 2024 is the standards effective. So we're gonna, I mean, that is the date that this new SL methodology will be effective, but it is available. I think the changes have been finalized. So I think we should be available the updated one here pretty soon.
Okay, and then I also noticed that you only reference FAC 1114, RO8. I think there was some changes to the system voltage limit, and that would be to reference the TOP 001.
That's a good point. Yeah, sorry, that's a good point. It does reflect, and our existing methodology actually documents the system voltage limits. It's mostly system voltage limit definition, right? I think our SL methodology actually reflects that, what it has been.
Okay, so you didn't see any need for modifications to
Yeah, major changes. I think some of the work that Samson actually does, Samson implemented under the existing SL methodology task force, voltage methodology task force, right? I think some of the changes that the Samson worked on actually reflected the new standard changes. So we didn't feel that it's going to change a whole lot under the new paradigm.
Very good. Thank you, Raj.
Good. Any other questions?
I do not see any other questions in queue.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's it from a slides point of view. Michelle, can you go to the next slide and see if I have anything there? Okay, good. Thank you. Hand up to Tim back.
Okay, so that wraps up our presentations. For the next meeting, it's going to be on October 10th, also 1 to 2:30 Pacific time, and you can visit the webpage for more details, and you can also go to the portal, and there's additional details there. We're open for public comment.
Yeah, I just want to mention quickly on that next meeting, October 10th, we'll be holding that in the Pacific Northwest. PGE has graciously agreed to host it. So as Lena talked about, be sure to register so we can get a good idea of who's going to show up in person. It'll be available virtual as well.
All right, I do not see any raised hands in queue on WebEx or on the phone-only line at this time.
Okay. Anything else before we adjourn this session? Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. We will see you shortly for the executive session for members.
Elaine, are we starting that at 2 p.m.?
Do we take 5 minutes? You know what? I'll get it started, and if everybody joins at 2, that's fine.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using event services. You may now disconnect.